Welcome to the Present and Sober podcast with your hosts, Sam Goldfinch and Ellie Crow. If you want to make your life bigger, not smaller, then this is the podcast for you. If you can sense that you're destined for more and you're curious about how drinking could be holding you back, listen in and come on this journey with us. Through the interplay of mind and body practices, we will help you elevate your daily life and discover the wonder and potential of going alcohol-free. Let's make life bigger together.
And I said to him, "What can you see?" And I'll now get emotional because it still freaks me out. This, but he turned to me and looked at me square on in the face, and he said, "What I can see is a woman with life-saving instincts."
Oh my God!
And it was just like one of those moments, and I just thought, it was what's going on in my world.
Hey everybody, here we are at that crazy time of year, in between Christmas and New Year, where no one knows what to do with themselves. Well, I never do anyway. As it happens this year, I'm quite busy. But if you find yourself with some time, what better way to spend it than with me and Ellie and our very special guest today. So today we've got Tabbin Almond with us. And Tabbin is a This Naked Mind coach and just an absolute inspiration. I won't say too much about her story because she's going to share in depth. But it's fair to say that Tabbin has had some huge life events, both from health, in her personal relationships, work, many different things. And she's come through and she's such an inspiration now to many other people, and she helps them find their alcohol freedom. Tabbin had 7 years alcohol free at one point, and she talks about what it was that happened in her life that caused her to go back to drinking, and the huge learnings that she's had since then, and how it opened up this wonderful space of true liberation. And that's something you've heard me talk about before, and so it's just really nice to have somebody else on the show sharing their story with that too. So that said, if you want a bit of extra support for January, come find us in the Facebook group. And that's about it. Right, without further ado, I'll hand you over to me, Ellie and Tabbin. Happy in-betweeny bit between Christmas and New Year.
Hello, welcome to the Present and Sober podcast this snowy Tuesday. It's super snowy in Cambridge, which is beautiful. The kids have had a great time. Dogs have had a wonderful time channeling their puppiness. Coco barking at sledges yesterday. So we've got a really special episode today. We have a wonderful guest here, and this is a very special lady who we're just discussing, I've now known her for nearly 3 years, which seems really, really bizarre. So the lovely Tabbin and I trained together as when we were in the first cohort of This Naked Mind coaches trained online. So we have the wonderful Tabbin Almond here. Hello, Tabbin.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So we trained together all that time ago, which just seems crazy now. And what a 6 months that was. And so it was wonderful to get to know you during that time. And we thought this was going to be a really great opportunity to get you on. There's some really interesting and different subjects as part of your story, which we'd like to get into. And then you have something very exciting to share with everybody at the end. So you have to make sure you listen to the full episode because there's a special announcement towards the end, something that you're definitely not going to want to miss. So Tabbin, where's the best place to start with your story?
Well, I guess my story is probably like so many other people who go on to develop problems with alcohol in later life, that I grew up in a family where alcohol was kind of omnipresent. Both of my parents drank. My mother really quite problematically, and most of my life, I'm ashamed to say, but it's true, I kind of hated her for it. I didn't understand it. I thought she was weak for not controlling it. All the things, the sort of cliches about alcoholism in inverted commas, and I just really resented her for it. And then, of course, I started to behave in exactly the same way. So that caused all sorts of real sort of inner conflict and turmoil, and buckets full of self-loathing, because there I was, I'd been so mean in my head. I wasn't actually that nasty to my mum, but I was angry inside and resentful. And then I started doing exactly the same thing. And yet socially that seemed fine, but I knew in my heart of hearts it wasn't. And once I left university, I went pretty well straight into advertising. And advertising in the 1980s, was a very heavy drinking culture. So I fitted right in. I did really well. I could hold my drink, and for a while everything was fine. I think I was sort of pretty well permanently half pissed, But we regularly would go out drinking at lunchtime and I was on the media planning side, so I would be wined and dined by the media owners, the newspapers and TV stations, etc. And it was completely normal to go out and have a gin and tonic first, and then plenty of wine with your lunch, and maybe a glass of port afterwards, and then go back to the office, and then come 6:30, roll over the road into the pub. And it was just, looking back on it, it was insane. But I think that's where the addiction probably, took hold. I was quite far down that pitcher plant. And then got married and had kids, and I didn't have any problem not drinking during pregnancy. And I hear that so often from people. They say, well, how come I've had my kids, but I was fine when I was pregnant, but as soon as they're born, I seem to have gone back to it. And I think you had the same experience, didn't you, Ellie?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's, I still find that, I think it's just, there's that really deep, maternal hormonal thing that we know that we don't want to damage that little unborn baby. But once we're not doing any immediate physical harm to them after they're born, it seems like all bets are off. And that was certainly the case for me.
There's just something interesting I just want to say at this juncture, because you just really hit on something in that it's incredible, isn't it, how we can have so much care for another being and yet we can't have that care for ourselves.
Absolutely.
That was deep for me. But then equally, at the time when I was going through my pregnancies, it sounds really silly, I didn't realize how harmful alcohol was back then, because there's no way that I would have gone looking for any more evidence as to why I shouldn't be drinking. I kind of knew it wasn't good for me, but I had no idea how bad it was for me. But yeah, it just struck me then as you were talking, just how, and I think that's quite typical, that we can be very caring and loving towards others and nurturing towards others, but typically it's not something that we're great at in looking after ourselves. Yeah.
And I think also at that stage, I didn't realize that alcohol was a form of self-harm. I just didn't understand that. It's obvious from the point of view of hangovers, but I didn't really understand that the consequences went any further than that, and that life could be an awful lot better in every aspect without alcohol. That it took quite a long time for that penny to drop. Yeah. So I guess by my sort of mid to late 30s, I knew that my relationship with alcohol was troubled. And I went a couple of times, maybe to half a dozen meetings, something like that, to Al-Anon, because I was sort of projecting all of this onto my parents, really. And I don't remember an awful lot about those sessions other than being in tears from beginning to end of everyone. I just found it incredibly emotional. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And then I thought, okay, this isn't actually so much about their drinking, it's about your drinking. That's where the issue is. You can't change other people, but you can do something about yourself. So I then went to AA for a few sessions in London. We were still living in London at the time. It didn't feel like me at all. There was nobody who, there were lots of, it sounds really judgmental, but there were guys who'd just been released from prison for beating their wives up and stuff. And I felt like a complete outsider there. Yeah. And also this labeling thing. I thought, I'm not an alcoholic. I haven't done any of those things that these people are talking about. I just don't feel right. And I think alcohol is to blame, but I certainly didn't identify as an alcoholic. I don't think I ever have, really. And then we moved to Devon, and of course the problem doesn't go away when you move house. And so I tried AA down here, which was better in that there were more people sort of like me. I didn't feel so sort of different. But the labeling thing really got to me, and the whole idea of having to stand up and say, hello, my name's Tabbin, I'm an alcoholic. And I was thinking, is that really, I've got to say that every week for the rest of my life? Just felt very negative, very, very sort of unhappy. And most of the people there seemed unhappy as well. So I then just went on a sort of a quit lit fest, really. I've read so much and read the Alan Carr book, and then thought, and that really resonated with me, and I thought, okay, I get all of this, but it wasn't quite sticking. I wasn't able to change my behavior. I was sort of understanding the principles and everything, but not being able to put it into practice long term. So I then did a one-on-one hypnotherapy day with one of his trained hypnotherapists in London, which at the time was just brilliant. You're not sort of like completely unconscious hypnotized, but in a very sort of like a deep trance at the end. And he just repeated a lot of almost like mantras, and he said things like, when people offer you a drink, you'll say, no, thank you, I don't drink, and you'll think, I'm so glad I don't drink anymore. And those things went in really, really deep, and because I can still remember them. And it doesn't go into a huge amount of science, doesn't go into the sort of the what happens in your body with alcohol. It's more on the sort of social, cultural, you don't need this stuff. And I think the guy was very good. He kind of took the time during the day to get to know me, worked out that I'm quite a perfectionist, and once I've said I'll do something, I'll do it. So that was, I think he used that quite a lot in the hypnotherapy session. And it was great. I didn't drink for 7 years, which was actually pretty awesome because and it made a huge difference. And I was able to cope with quite a lot of stuff. My father was he had some form of dementia. It was never diagnosed whether it was Alzheimer's or something else, but he was sort of getting worse and worse. And with my mum's drinking, that was all quite problematic. And just sort of coping with that. And it's dementia's horrible because it's that sort of you lose the person twice kind of thing. So there was that. Meanwhile, my husband had very, very bad depression, and there were all sorts of problems. Cut a long story short, whilst I was still not drinking, I worked out that the depression was to do with his sexuality. And I actually asked him if he was gay, and he got incredibly angry and defensive. And I thought, yeah, you're right. Took quite a lot longer before he was ready to say he was. Well, he's obviously bisexual rather than completely gay, and I think sexuality is very much on a spectrum anyway. But that was, the combination of that, and meaning the end of the marriage, but also his very serious mental health problems. I mean, that because he'd known this all along, all his adult life, and kind of buried it and suppressed it, and so that really affected his mental health. So he was in a bad way, and so in the sort of couple of years leading up to us splitting up, things were very, very unhappy and difficult. And so, and he also, his way of sort of dealing with things was to spend money we didn't have. So we had horrific financial problems as well. So it was a bit of a perfect storm. A lot of stress, and he, after he'd sort of come out, he went off to Australia, initially just for a little while. It ended up being 2 years, and that was at the beginning of November. And I was diagnosed in January with breast cancer. And the weird thing about my breast cancer was that I had a lump and it was being checked. So I was having regular mammograms like twice a year, and had been for like 4 or 5 years. And every time I'd get a letter saying, "Dear Mrs. Almond, happy to say there's nothing to worry about." And after John had gone, I had another of these mammograms. Sort of, I don't know, it was probably early December or something. And between Christmas and New Year, I got the letter saying, "Dear Mrs. Almond, nothing to worry about." And that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I thought, and it was a really strong, like, deep intuition. And it was exactly the same kind of physical feeling that I had had when I realized that John was gay. And on the basis that that had been right, and it had been like, I don't want to believe this, but I think it's true. I thought, I need to do something about this. I just don't think that that's right. I think there is something the matter. So I saw the doctor very early in the new year, and explained, and they sort of looked at me and said, "Yeah, you sure about this?" And I said, "Honestly, please, just I want it checked." So the GP knows me quite well. It's like the joy of living in the countryside. You do know your doctor. So I was referred into the hospital, and by the end of that week, I knew that I had breast cancer. But it was just the most surreal thing. I went into the hospital, and you see a consultant first, who's like actually a surgeon, and she took one look and she said, "Yeah, I don't like the look of this. I'm glad you're here." And she said, "What will happen next is you'll go upstairs in the hospital. They'll give you another mammogram, and then you'll have an ultrasound." Now, the guy who does the ultrasound will not volunteer any information, but if you ask him outright, he will tell you what he thinks is going on. So I had the mammogram, and then I was shown into a room where they were going to do the ultrasound. And he came in and he said, "Oh, well, I've just had a look at the mammogram. Everything looks fine. So tell me why you're here, because you only had one 3 weeks ago or something." So I said, I can't really explain it other than I've got this really, really strong intuition. And I can't get it out of my head. I just really believe there's something the matter. And he said, "Well," and he was kind of almost like a little bit patronizing. He, sort of almost, "So there, let's just do this, and then you can stop worrying your pretty little head," sort of thing. So he did the ultrasound, and he was looking at the screen and stuff. And I said to him, "What can you see?" And I'll now get emotional because it still freaks me out. This, but he turned to me and looked at me square on in the face, and he said, "What I can see is a woman with life-saving instincts."
Oh my God.
And it was just like one of those moments. And I just thought, it was, what's going on in my world? Everything seems to be falling apart. And now and he said, "What I can see," and he showed me on the thing, is a 4.5 to 5 centimeter tumor. And it was a thing they called a DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ. And he said, there is no doubt. He said it's absolutely, because it's so big, it's really obvious. And he said, I think and I hope that we will be in time. He said, "You will be okay, but you're going to have some pretty horrible treatment." He said, "We'll get biopsies done today so that we know exactly what we're dealing with, because there are different types of breast cancer." But he said, "There's no doubt that this is a tumor." And he said, "Given its size, it may have spread. So we will need to check all the not all the lymph nodes, but check the lymph nodes." And the amazing thing was that even with that news, and because I didn't realize I was going to find anything out that day, I hadn't gone with anybody. I was on my own. And you sort of go into autopilot. I went into town because I needed to buy a birthday card, and I bumped into a friend in WH Smith's, and she just took one look at me and said, "You okay?" And I said, "No, not really." And I told her, and she's a very sort of she's a really kind-hearted, lovely person, but she's kind of quite sort of matter of fact as well. And she said, "Oh, that'll be fine. Sally, my friend Sally, well, she had that. So I'll get her to ring you tonight." Bless her. This friend Sally did phone me, and I saw her last week. She's been an absolute rock. She was just brilliant. But even then, I went home on my own, to an empty house with my husband having gone, first week of January, never the best time of year. And I didn't drink. There was alcohol in the house, but I didn't drink. It didn't cross my mind. And then I sort of had, then it was all confirmed, and my daughter was coming home for a reading week from uni, so I told her about it, and then we worked out how to tell my son, who was in his first year at university, and got through all of that. And I had my first operation, so I opted to do surgery and then chemo. I just kind of wanted to get rid of it because of the size of the lump. I had to have a mastectomy. There was no lumpectomy on offer. It had to be the whole breast. So I had that, and at the same time as that, they did they test the lymph nodes. They put this funny dye in, and then that shows up so that they know where the lymph nodes are, and they take a sample from a number of them to see. And in my case, they tested 7, and it was in all 7.
Oh, God.
So, and that was when I found that out. I was with my daughter, and my brother had come over from Switzerland, where he was living at the time. And then suddenly it seemed to get a load more serious, because they were talking about, bone scans and all the rest of it. And I'd lost friends to breast cancer, and one had got into her bones, and somebody else had been brain tumors. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm not going to make this, and my poor children, their father's off, living the life of a gay man in Sydney, and not in the best of shape. And, if I go as well, and so when we got home that night, my brother and daughter opened a bottle of wine, and I just said, I think I'll have a glass. And I probably drank a bottle. I was just, I was, that drinking to not be there, just to be numbed out. And my daughter the following morning thought it was hilarious, because she'd never really seen me with a hangover, because I'd for the previous 7 years, since she was sort of 13 or something, I hadn't drunk. So she probably had seen me with a hangover, but not knowingly. And I didn't drink a lot straight away, because I was having loads more surgery and then chemotherapy, and it's hard enough to keep anything down when you're having chemotherapy. Certainly don't use, But gradually, once I was better, I just went into my old ways, and I've actually got it on my website. I've got a photo of me with a scarf wrapped around my head because I had no hair, celebrating the final day of my treatment, which was the last day of radiotherapy, with a glass of Prosecco. And I look at that photo now and I think, that's just so messed up. But I just didn't know, and the irony of celebrating the end of breast cancer treatment with alcohol, which contributes to people getting breast cancer, it's just mind-blowing, really. But so, and I, even though it makes me emotional thinking about it, I always share that story, because I now know of at least one person who has followed up on a mammogram that they, and been diagnosed as actually having breast cancer. They're not infallible. They're really good, but they're not infallible. And they think it's something between 5 and 8% of breast cancers can be missed by a mammogram, because they go on the density of the breast tissue, and it's a bit luck of the draw, really. So I always like to share the story, just because I think it's important that people know, if you're worried, make sure you have 2 tests, not just the mammogram. So either a scan or an ultrasound, just so that you can rule it out.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about how that intuition manifested? Because what a fascinating thing that, to have that guidance on 2 different occasions with 2 very different things. But the way that you described it was like, I can't ignore this. Like, it's too big. Can you tell us more about how it felt?
Yeah, it's funny enough, I had it another time and I ignored it. The first time it happened was the morning after John and I got engaged, and I dropped him at work, and he kind of pecked me on the cheek and got out the car. And I remember sitting in the car afterwards thinking, there's something that's not right about this. And that was a very, very deep feeling. And it was like, that is not, fairy tales and stuff aside, that's not how it should be when you've just agreed to spend the rest of your life with somebody. That just doesn't feel right. And the thought process I went through was actually, well, you're bloody lucky somebody's asked you. You probably won't get asked again. And it was that real not good enough stuff. And so I literally ignored that deep intuition. And I mean, I can't regret it because John and I are still friends, and I've got 2 wonderful children. So things are what they are. But I now can see that my instincts were obviously quite right then. And the thing with John, it was just it's a real feeling very deep in your sort of belly, sort of under the rib cage, a real sort of contraction there, and a real feeling of tension in the core of your body. I can't really think of a better. And if you stop and think about it, then things like your heart rate goes up, and but that's not the instant thing. It's just this really just a deep, people talk about a gut feeling, don't they? And it is in the gut. And just everything really, really tense inside. Not in the head, not in the shoulders, because normally for me, stress, I would say, oh, to my shoulders, I start going hunched up like that. But this is completely different. And as I say, with the breast cancer, it literally, I woke up in the middle of the night with that feeling and thinking about it. And I hadn't really paid much attention to the letter. I just thought, oh, that's good, And, so it was the subconscious telling me, hang on a minute, this isn't as good as you, So it really, really, and I'm fascinated in that sort of mind-body connection. And I recently did the Jolene Park course that I know both of you two have done. And I found all of that side of things just fascinating. Really, I think if I had my time again, I wouldn't have ever gone near advertising. I'd have been into nutrition and holistic health, I think. But
it is so all fascinating. And it's to me, it's just so interesting because we have this deep connection, and it's over the years it's just obscured. There's so many times where I've had that feeling, and just as you say, I've ignored it to my detriment, and then it's only with hindsight you can kind of see, oh right, okay, and it's not that you want to change how things, like I wouldn't change any part of my life. It had to be the way that it was. But the thing that's been so beautiful about removing alcohol from my life is to have that state of clarity more often than not, so that I feel that connection. And I've gone through some stuff very recently personally, and I just knew. And it just as you described, it's like I don't want this to be the case, but I know that it is. And so having that courage to be able to turn towards something that you could be extremely fearful of, and it's not easy by any means, but I always think of when we were in coach training, Annie always talked about easy now, hard later, or hard now, easy later. And so whenever I'm faced with one of those moments, I kind of hear Annie's voice, because that always to me rings true, and so I just think there's this wonderful gift with not having alcohol in the way, because it gives us the presence of mind and the capacity, the confidence, the courage to be able to deal with these sorts of things. We're all going to have things in our lives, circumstances that are challenging. And to know that you have that life-saving instinct, like you've got everything that you need inside, it's the most wonderful thing.
And I think if I had been drinking at that time, I might not have even woken up that night in the middle of the night, or I would have woken up just thinking, oh, why did you drink so much last night? Or I might not have listened to that. And if it had gone much later, the cancer was obviously on its way. I was really lucky it hadn't spread any further. But it was in the lymph nodes, and that's how it spreads around the body. So I was incredibly fortunate and I'm so grateful always that I knew to listen to what was going on inside. Even in a fairly confused and not really understanding way, but I did pay attention, and so it's, and our instincts, we use so little of what we're capable of. Our subconscious is such a massively powerful thing, and we just scratch the surface, really, don't we?
We do. Which kind of brings us nicely on to the other subject that we wanted to delve into, and this is, as you say, just what the subconscious is capable of. And so you had this really rich experience with hypnotherapy, which you said, again, is fascinating. But then you've then had that period where you've gone back to drinking. Can you take us from there in terms of what happened next and how you found your way into the world of This Naked Mind?
As I say, it was 7 years, and it wasn't till things got really, really tough that I drank. But looking back on it, I can see that the belief that alcohol has the power to solve problems, which is completely rubbish, but that belief was there and hadn't been addressed. And so I slipped back into my old patterns of drinking, which, because I live in a rural area, have to drive, they tended to be to go out, not drink a lot, but then drink when I got home. So I was doing a lot of drinking on my own. I used to sort of make jokes about, unexplained bruises and stuff. I was walking into furniture, and going to bed far later than I meant to, because I would just, I'll just finish off this bottle and all of that nonsense. And I was sort of low level hungover a lot of the time. I remember, I moved house during that period and to where I live now, and I can remember sort of standing in the shower just thinking, not another morning where I feel sick. And yes, well past there being any other explanation, it was a hangover. And it's just and the self-loathing really built up again as well. And so I toyed with the idea of AA, but I thought, I'm not doing that again. It just doesn't work for me. But it's quite frightening to have, and I know a lot of people I coach have been through that, have had a period of being alcohol free, then they start drinking again, and it's really hard to have that faith and confidence in yourself once you've broken a long period of being alcohol free and slipped back into your old patterns. You just think, that's the real me. I'm destined to be like this, and very sort of fatalistic. So I just started, I think that probably all of us come across This Naked Mind by Googling, am I an alcoholic and things like that, or how can I stop drinking, and, drinking too much. And the sort of, once, I obviously sort of clicked on one link and started, getting served lots of ads and that sort of stuff. And I kept reading about it and thinking, this sounds really good. This all makes sense. And I absolutely loved, and still love, the idea that this is not our fault, but it is our responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm not a defective human being. I'm just somebody who got addicted to an addictive substance. End of. Nothing wrong with me. I'm not any sort of an ick. I'm just a human who happened to get addicted to something that's addictive. And I just loved that. And there was a period where I was sort of like, I had this sort of cognitive dissonance going on in my head, because I thought, I really, really like everything that Annie's writing and that I'm reading here. But, and you two will get this as sort of Brits, and I'm quite a sort of, reserved person, and there's sort of the heavy sell, and you don't just get this, and you get this, and you get this, and it's not this much, it's I've taken all this money off. And I thought, this is just a con. And I remember I thought, this is just some sort of scam. And I was so resistant. And the number of times I nearly signed up for whatever, I think it was the intensive probably, and then didn't because I thought, no, you'll never see that money again. It's or it's just a heavy sell, and it's all shiny on the front and there's nothing underneath and stuff. And I'm just so grateful that I actually one day, and I can remember exactly where I was, where in the office, and this ad came up, and I just thought, fuck it, I'm going to do this. And I put it on a credit card because I didn't have the money, and I thought, I've got to sort this out. You've got to trust somebody. This woman seems legit. Just do it. And I did it. And I put my credit card details in. And about 10 minutes later, I went and got a cup of coffee. Thought, what the hell have you done? You haven't even got that money. What have you done? Honestly, best decision ever. but it was. And so, if anybody's listening to this, and sort of, particularly for us Brits, because a lot of us, I think, felt the same thing. It's just a cultural thing. We do things a little bit differently, and I should have known that. I work in advertising, and I don't now, but and I know that American marketing and advertising is just much more brash and in your face. We're very subtle, and we use wit and wry humor and irony and stuff, don't we? But no, it's just in your face, and but it was such a good decision, and I signed up for the intensive course, and one of the very first things, because at that stage we were so lucky because Annie was coaching it herself, and she said, "Oh, Tabbin, you're introducing Tabbin. That's an unusual name." I said, "Well, actually, it's really Catherine, and I couldn't say it when I was little. I said Tabbin," and she said, "I love that. It's so empowering. You named yourself." And I'd never thought about it that way. Yeah. So that's why I claim that now. Oh, I named myself. But it was just, and I loved it from the word go. And I can't remember when we started, but it was only a matter of weeks into it. The idea with the intensive, a bit like the Freedom Accelerated, was you did sort of 2 months where you could be in the pause if you wanted to, and then you did the alcohol experiment at the end. From the word go, I was hardly drinking because it was sort of like making sense. And then in May, I was doing the Moonwalk, which is a charity walk at night, like 26.2 miles in London in aid of breast cancer. And I was doing it with another friend who had breast cancer just after me, and both of our daughters, and my daughter's friend, and 3 other friends. So we're 8 of us doing it all together. And the night before, it's like overnight on a Saturday into Sunday. On the Friday night, I was with my daughter, and we went out and had a meal where she lives in London. And I had a glass of wine in front of me, and it wasn't particularly nice wine. And I just said to Lucy, "Do you want to finish that off? I don't want it." And I said to her then, "I'm done with it. I don't want to drink anymore." And I hadn't finished. She knew I was doing this course, and that was it. I haven't drunk since. So it felt right. Sometimes it's like I was about to do a charity walk for breast cancer, booze and breast cancer. We know all about that, don't we? So it just seemed right. So I haven't drunk. And that was 2018, May 2018. So I haven't. The joy is I haven't wanted to. I've sometimes had that thought when there's a half bottle of wine in the fridge of a wine that I particularly like. I'll think, that's the stuff I used to drink. I could drink that. And I was like, I don't want to. And that's wonderful. That is just the really empowering thing. And the process of just going through, and I think the difference between the hypnotherapy and This Naked Mind is, with This Naked Mind, we talk about the difference between liberation and fixation. And the hypnotherapy, there was a fair degree of fixation still. It was I didn't feel actively deprived, but it was a thing that I mustn't do, kind of thing. Whereas the difference now is, this is a thing I just don't want to do. Why would I want to do that? I know how it works. I know what the process is, and I know how unhappy it makes me and everybody else who gets involved with it. And so, I just can't envisage the circumstances where I would think that having a glass of wine was a good idea. I just, and I love that. Yeah.
It's a really key point. And I know I haven't said a lot, but that's because Ellie's been asking great questions and your story's fascinating. So I've just been sat here taking a day off, just tuning in. It's great.
All right, Sam, put your feet up.
But it's a really key point you make. I think it's something that a lot of people might not have heard before, is that freedom to me is not being free. It's not that you never have the thoughts again, per se. It's that you see them for exactly what they are, and they're no longer charged or sticky, I call them. They no longer have that kind of stick to them. And this is a lot of the same. This is true in kind of the ideas in and around mindfulness as well. Like, I think a lot of people, they have the idea that, so the idea is that I'm going to walk around and be thoughtless. But actually, the quiet mind, or that kind of state of being present, it's not that you're not thinking, it's that you're sat, you're watching from a different place, you're in a different perspective. So and to me now, like, if you get that thought of like, it wouldn't even matter, it's a different thing, right?
I often use, because I think often when we're coaching, people get really sort of upset, and I can think of one client in particular, and she sort of, I keep thinking about it, Tabbin. So those thoughts will come. You've been drinking hard for 40 years. Those thoughts will come into your head, but it's how you react to them. Just say, it's just a thought. And of course, if you go to your office Christmas party and it's the first time you've been not drinking, there's so many sort of circumstantial reminders there of what you have done in the past or what you could do now, that it's inevitable almost that you will think about having a drink. And I use the analogy, my son lives in Bristol and looks out on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which is stunning. And I don't know if you've ever walked across it, but unfortunately, it's a notorious suicide spot. So when you walk along Clifton Suspension Bridge as a pedestrian, there are all these signs along the side, say, for sort of Samaritans and lots of, basically charities to help people who are feeling really depressed. And you can walk onto the Clifton Suspension Bridge having never thought about suicide before in your life. But by the time you get to the other end, it is in your head as a possibility, just because you get all these prompts telling you not to do something or who to, and I think that often those thoughts about alcohol are just like those signs, really. They're inevitable, that if there are lots and lots of prompts around you, the thoughts will come up. And you can't switch them off. I love what Emily Fletcher says, that you've got as much chance of stopping thoughts popping into your head as you have of stopping your heart beating just by wishing it so. It's not possible. They do that. We're thinking sentient beings, but you don't have to act on them. And I think that's
it's also one of the reasons why I think, as much as something like flipping a thought can be helpful. So, for example, in Alan Carr, a lot, it would say, if you have that thought, remind yourself how grateful you are that, that means I don't have to. It's not that doesn't work to some extent. It's like working with the content of it. But if you go to the next level, which is seeing the nature of the thought, which your example of that, of the bridge is perfect at highlighting, is that you don't need to start convincing yourself about, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to jump off the bridge. Actually, you're like, that's just the thought. Like that's a phantom. It's like a monster under the bed, like when you're a young kid. Yeah. In the end, you're like, there actually aren't monsters under the bed. I don't need to you look once or whatever, and you're like, and then you turn the light off, you get upset again. Mum and dad come back or whatever. In the end, you just go, I realize the nature of this. It's not real. Yeah. And that's what that to me is like it's a really different thing to actually constantly having to challenge a thought, which may make a lot of sense for a little while, but in the end we kind of go, they never were me. It's got nothing to do with what I want.
Exactly.
It's not, it's totally. Just not. So I don't need to go to war with it or battle it or any of that. And that's freedom as I see it.
Yeah. And also the freedom just to make the choices you want.
Yeah.
Unencumbered by alcohol's sort of persistent nagging, at you. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, good on you for leaning in despite that UK skepticism.
That did make me laugh, because I was I was thinking back to when I got the invitation to the live alcohol experiment. So this is the first time I found myself in a funnel, as they're called.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell is it? Alcohol experiment? And I loved the language around it, like it being an experiment. And it just really resonated with me. I really liked Danny. I really liked the PDF about moderation that I'd read. And the thing that was a sticking point for me was spending $47 on myself. That was kind of like the first hurdle to get over. Like, I don't want to spend $47 on myself. I can't do that. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to drink in January, so I'm going to save about 400 quid and really compare. So I thought, oh, why not? Go on, I'll give it a go. And the thing that was really funny was that after I'd signed up for it, then these videos, you start to get drawn into it, and you've got these videos to watch and what have you. And so I'd gone from knowing Annie to this guy with a beard pops up. I'm like, who the hell is this? And I thought the exact same thing as you. I've been scammed. I'm in some kind of cult here. Like, who's this guy with the beard? Who we later find out is Scott Pinyard. So, and it was obviously, for me, I've talked about it so much. It was such a great experience. And actually the investment side of things, well, there's two parts to it. There is the deep knowing, again, that knowing that this is the right thing, that despite the fact that I don't spend $47 on myself, I'm going to, because I'm being led there and being guided by my gut. And then because I'd invested in myself, something shifted, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to describe it, but something shifted in me. And that investment meant that I showed up to everything. I'm a northerner, I wanted to get my $47 worth. And so I went to, I did every bit of pre-work, every journaling exercise, even if I didn't want to, even if I thought, oh no, this isn't relevant to me. I did everything, went along to every live. And that's how you can really make a difference in your life. By, it's all around, to me, it's this being willing to be wrong, and to start listening more carefully, more acutely to that voice. However, whether it's a heard voice or a felt voice, that thing that's guiding you.
And I think it's that curiosity. If you can accept that things aren't as you want them to be, if you knew the answer, you would have been able to sort it. Therefore, you have to be curious about what the answer might be, what alternatives are there. And that was really what was guiding me. So okay, so you've tried quite a lot of things and they haven't worked. And here's somebody telling you that this is something that really does work, and particularly for people like you. So why would you not give this a go? And go into it with a sort of really open mind. Just listen and take it all on board. And like you say, do the work, do the reading. I literally have lost count now of the number of copies of This Naked Mind that I've bought and given away.
Gave one to someone just the other day. I'm very excited to hear how they got on. So here we are.
Keep my signed one, the one that Annie signed for me. I've got, and I'm not giving that one away, but all the others.
It's such an awesome story. I'm thoroughly grateful that you would share it so sensitively with us. It was beautiful I've known you for a long time, but I didn't know the depths of your story as you've told it today. And it's been a real privilege to be a part of it. And so here we are. We're now some 3 years on since embarking on, coming up to 3 years since embarking on that training, and how much has changed and what's happening. And in particular, what would be lovely is for you to tell us a little bit about what you're up to. And then I'm not going to spoil it, but the grand finale of the thing that you're really up to, because I'm very excited about it.
So I qualified at the same time as you, Ellie, but probably a few months later, because I was working full time, and it took me a while to actually do all the things to certify. And then I worked at my coaching 1 day a week. So I cut my job from 5 days a week to 4 days a week. Now, anybody who's worked in advertising or marketing knows that 5 days a week is, trying to do 4 days, you still end up doing 5.5 anyway. So, and I was struggling to see how I could kind of make the switch to coach full time, because I was loving it, but not just not having enough time to do it. And then my mum died, and I'm happy to say that thanks to everything I'd learned through this Naked Mind, our relationship was on a fantastically strong footing then. I was really, I wasn't sitting in judgment on her at all. And we never talked a lot about her drinking. But the irony is, after she died, she never closed a window ever. When she went online, and I sorted out her computer for my brother, and the number of times she had been to my website was insane. I know, just mad, yeah. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew she'd looked at it, and I was very careful when I wrote my story not to kind of write anything hurtful. But it was just mad. It was just, incredible. So, but after my mum died, she left me and my brothers a little bit of money. I thought, okay, I've got the financial cushion. So I resigned from advertising. And so since February of this year, I've been coaching sort of full time. And it's just been great. And you probably, so you sort of work out what your sweet spot is. And I think for a lot of us, the people we relate to best are people with similar stories to our own. So my sort of sweet spot, I can't use the word avatar. It's too jargony for me, but the people I really love coaching tend to be fairly senior professional people, and I coach people, and also people who have maybe been successful and have retired or halfway to retirement, where there's a bit of a feeling of, is this all there is to life, kind of thing. But with the professional people as well, there's often a lot of shame and fear of being found out, if you like, because they're in senior positions, and so that would tend to be one-on-one coaching with people like that, to just help them kind of overcome the shame. And of course, once you know this isn't your fault, you're not a bad person. Becoming addicted to alcohol is inevitable. If you keep on drinking it in large enough quantities, you will become addicted. So it's just a fact of, it's just, biology, isn't it? So those are the people I work with particularly, and I'm doing quite a lot of work now with companies, talking to through their wellbeing teams, to help employees be aware of the dangers of alcohol and become just aware of their own drinking, but also where to turn if they think they need help. But also, and this is much more of a long-term thing, to try and educate, and that's not too strong a word really, HR departments about the fact that just because somebody has a problem with alcohol, it doesn't mean they are an alcoholic and are never going to be any good and that you should get rid of them. That with the right help, those people can overcome their problem and go on to be incredibly valuable, productive members of the workforce. But actually in the UK, a lot of people have a clause in their contract that says, if you are incapacitated and unable to perform your duties due to drugs or alcohol, you may be summarily dismissed. So if you've got that in your contract, you're not very likely to go and talk to HR about the fact you think you might have a problem with alcohol. So that's, if I could make one change in the world, that's what I would love to change, just to have a more enlightened attitude, so that people can talk to their companies and get help without fear of being dismissed. And it's a really long-term thing. It's not going to happen overnight, I know, but just raising it. So I do quite a lot of speaking to companies and organisations about that, just to try and start spreading that word.
It's amazing.
It's very rewarding stuff to do. Yeah.
And so That's an amazing
reveal.
mission, and I think good for
Yeah.
you. Like, so cool. But yeah, here we are. Big reveal. Tell us about this super
So
exciting thing.
so this exciting thing is in response to things that clients have said to me. I have put together a pretty awesome retreat, which I'm calling the Reset Retreat. And the reset bit is that so often people say, I know the things, I get it, I understand all of this. I just need a bit of time out to kind of literally reset, to immerse myself in this, and to start to practice self-compassion rather than self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
And I just need some time. And so often I'm coaching people and they'll say, God, I don't get 5 minutes to myself,
Mm-hmm.
And so to remove people from that kind of very harried, pressured, and often, let's face it, we put that pressure on ourselves, but remove people from that for 5 days. And it's there's two of us coaching, myself and Anna Donaghy, who is another coach, and she and I have worked together in advertising. She's still working in advertising, so she's coaching part-time, and we're friends and we've worked together for a very, very long time. So I know that we've worked together a lot, so this will be great. So we're coaching on alcohol every day, but we've also put together a package of great self-care, self-compassion kind of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just going to talk about meditation. We've got a guy who was a Buddhist monk for 7 years coming and talking about meditation and taking us on a sort of like meditation journey, if you like, both inside and outside. We've got a fantastic yoga teacher. We've got this most incredible woman who does breath work. It's like, I sort of think of it as extreme yoga breath work, and she calls it psychedelic breath work. But I think anybody who's done any breath work, we know just even the sort of the 4, 7, 8 breath work where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and exhale slowly for 8. That instantly calms your nervous system. So what she does is that on steroids, really, and it's just amazing. Got a fantastic writer, a lady called Sally Page, whose novel is now available in Tesco, if anybody wants. But she has had quite an interesting life, to put it mildly. Her first book was published when she was 60, and she's a great journaler. So she's going to do a session on journaling, and journaling in its own right, but also as a route to creativity. So I think that'll be really interesting. We've got a vegetarian chef coming, and she'll do a session on vegetarian cookery as well. And the final one, the retreat is going to be at a beautiful country house in the middle of Dartmoor, which we've taken over the whole place. And Dartmoor is very wild and remote, and it's got lots of amazing Bronze Age ruins like stone rows, stone circles and things. And we've got a guided walk and sort of tour of some of these with a lady who knows Dartmoor really well, and she'll explain what we're seeing and stuff. So that's an opportunity to kind of go back in time, because it's pretty fascinating what was going on then, but also it's right out there in nature. I mean, it's so wild and beautiful. It's a very small retreat. There are only 7 rooms, so if everybody shared, there would be a maximum of 14 people. I don't anticipate they will, so it'll probably be somewhere between 10 and 12 women only, just because it's such a small venue, and we thought that our dynamic was going to be easier if it was just women. Mm-hmm. We tend to find more women than men in most of our programs anyway, don't we? So, and it's happening the end of February, beginning of March, 26th of February, beginning of March. And there's a whole load more information on my website, which is wine2watercoaching.com. But I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be great. And the whole idea is just to give people the chance to spend a bit of time on themselves and reset, sort of. So it's not for people who can't go a day without alcohol, because we are asking people not to drink during to be alcohol free. So they need to know that they can even if it's, with a bit of encouragement, they can be alcohol free for 5 days. But I know that there are an awful lot of people in that bracket who can do it, but in that pattern of repeated day ones, which is just the worst place to be. It's horrible, that stage. So this is about just reset, focus on yourself, start to value yourself and love yourself. Because the one thing that I know is that alcohol is self-sabotage, and the antidote to self-sabotage is self-compassion, self-care, self-love. And that's really what this retreat is all about. So yeah, very excited about it.
Sounds
beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's kind of what I wish I could have done.
Yeah, and that's a really powerful thing to build, like those kind, because we're so invested in those things. Well, we'll be sure to put the link to your website and all that kind of stuff in the show notes. So for anyone who's thinking, oh God, I didn't have time to write it down, then don't worry, you can just go click the show notes and go find out all the stuff that Tabbin's doing. And I guess all the links to reach out if people want to contact you about any other kind of coaching or whatever, it's all on there as well, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, this has been such fun. So lovely to talk with you both.
No,
it's been wonderful. And it's interesting how it's come full circle. So when we right at the beginning, we were talking about that capacity we have to care for others, but not ourselves. So what a wonderful thing that you've created that is going to give people that space to really start to nurture themselves in a very, very different way and really connect with who and what they really are. It's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's going to be a really valuable experience for the people that come.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story.
Brilliant. It's been great. Really lovely to talk with you both.
Awesome. What an amazing inspiration Tabbin is. It's just incredible, and it's so exciting to see that she's offering these awesome things. So if anyone's interested, be sure to check out the links in the show notes and go to Tabbin's website and look at all that stuff. I'm sure she'd be very, very happy to receive an email from you. And so New Year's Eve is literally just around the corner. Enjoy it. Have an awesome time. Know that you have everything you need to have the most amazing alcohol-free New Year. If this is your first one or your 10th one, joy, all those things, they come from inside of us. They don't come from the world. They come through us when we fall into connection and the present moment, and just remember who we really are. You have an amazing week, and see you next week.